Hey gang, before I start this video on PvP strategy and tier list for character class, I'd just like to emphasize that in the time that we've been playing the alpha, there's still a great depth of gameplay yet to be explored by, from my observation, pretty much everyone that's actively and regularly practicing and playing in PvP content. So by no means is this a definitive kind of guide or a tier list by any means. Most characters have only had the opportunity to, or most players have only had the opportunity to really explore one style of play for each character, and from what I've seen, each class has very viable options in different ways of playing. So while I talk about it, I might try and, if it doesn't require too much concentration, just start sort of daily activities I do when first logging in. So first of all, I've been fortunate enough to enter the alpha at probably, I think it was the first day, and having enjoyed the PvP content, the things I've enjoyed the most about the game have been party play options and also PvP, specifically Battlegrounds, which is basically the most extensive mode for PvP. So I've been, as long as Battlegrounds has been active, which was perhaps from the first, maybe second week of the game, when initially it was open all the time, but I don't think there was ever enough people queuing to get a match. The one day we actually got in for matches and we started to spam Battlegrounds and tell all our friends that it was working. The very next day it was limited to 2 hours each day, from 12:30 midday till 1:30, and then 6:30 p.m. till 7:30. So since that time, people have only really had 2 times a day, and myself working full time, at best I could get in for a match during lunch on weekends, on weekdays, to try and get a win in for my achievements or daily activities, just in case I didn't have the opportunity to play at night. But I have been able to join, for the most part, every evening Battlegrounds, and I've thoroughly enjoyed exploring the depths of PvP content. I have experience in sort of amateur competitive games like Tekken, which mechanically can operate fairly similarly, so that experience has allowed me to learn relatively quickly, I suppose, compared to players who haven't been competitive in action type combat games. But yeah, it's anyone who's sort of Dota based or played games like that probably would have a much greater advantage in the steep learning curve of learning their class and how to use their abilities effectively. So first of all, one thing I think about the PvP, particularly Battleground mode, is, it's hard to look at if, say, someone's entering late or they haven't been efficient at gearing their character, so there's a significant power gap to really be able to, compete and compare and strategize too effectively. I certainly recommend anyone who's currently in the alpha and looking to improve how they play PvP, that they focus on surviving in order to actually learn when to engage and disengage the enemy. Obviously, if you're dead and respawning, you can't be learning anything. And even with the significant power gap, if you do spawn on a side that has relatively good opponents that can keep relatively good teammates that can potentially keep your opponents from destroying you too quickly, there is an opportunity there to improve and learn, and perhaps even observe how their actually able to, be effective. So regarding each class, I'll start with a tier list, so to speak, of each class, where I feel they fit currently in the game. If there's anything that can be improved for tactics in Battlegrounds, it would be not necessarily to nerf the best characters, but to scale damage, so to speak, proportional to a match size. So in Battlegrounds, you've got 8 versus 8 people, and in that context, having any character able to one hit other characters of similar power level basically makes the game more of a mechanic of respawn strategy rather than in-game battle tactics. And of course, respawning is by far the least enjoyable part of PvP. You're not able to do anything. You can only watch what's happening around the area you died. So improving the survivability would force players to use more effective strategies. But of course, with the way that the mode works, if characters were too tanky or not enough damage was able to be applied in a short amount of time, whether it be by one character or a group, then the objectives would become quite difficult to attain. So that would be, a way of balancing that mode to really explore the depths of character builds and so forth. But again, that'd be a very fine line in how much. Currently, there is a very high disproportion between offensive abilities and defensive abilities. And naturally, because the PvE content of the game isn't particularly challenging aside from pushing challenge rifts, it encourages players to focus on damage rather than defense in order to progress through the game as fast as possible. So it's very likely that players will have gear that's focused on offense when they first start playing in PvP, because there really is no advantage in defensive abilities in the PvE content of the game. It would simply just slow your progress because it'd take longer to achieve any objectives you're trying to achieve. So the way I'd currently rate the class strategy would be to start with the Barbarian, who I would consider an S class or an S tier character class in the game, based on its abilities and the different builds that I've seen and faced, both on my team and as opposition. It's quite reasonable with the relatively small amount of regular strong players currently in the Australian Alpha that were any 8 good Barbarian players to spawn on the same side. I would be very surprised if any composition would actually be able to beat them. And the main reason for that is the variety of viable builds that I've seen. Their ability to survive and then recoup and heal, and in a party of other good players, they can provide that support to enable sort of a rinse repeat type of offense to clear the enemies quite quickly and just win on respawn timers increasing. I've only played most of the other classes to a limited degree now that there's more time available with less content in the alpha, and Barbarian's probably the least I've played. Following the Barbarian, I would consider, as far as strategies when facing Barbarians, given their survivability and there's 3 ways in which they can prevent death. One of their skills a legendary gem, and also the cheat death mechanism available as a magic ability on gear. As a result of that, and the amount of damage that they can do, they become very dangerous, and also not only hard to kill, but in a good party, they have the ability to, retreat to protected areas, heal whilst their abilities cool down, rather than having to die after they've burnt their cooldowns and then respawn slower and slower, which is where I would sort of fit the next character in the tier list, the Crusader, who relies more potentially on doing a lot of damage quite quickly, but then has a far more difficult time in actually re-engaging without dying if they're facing a well-stacked team or relatively balanced team on the opposition. So the way you could approach Barbarians in the match is you certainly need to avoid their attacks that can pull you in. They are a melee character, obviously, so being able to kite, avoid their damage, and then come in once their survival abilities have expired, and their main damage is on cooldown, which can be particularly difficult for some classes to do. The style of monk I'm playing is perhaps the best suited for that. Whenever I see Barbarians on the field, I consider it a high importance to bait out their abilities, get their health as low as I can, and then simply avoid their attacks, and either wait for my party to come in and finish them off, or prevent them from being able to retreat from battle to heal. Following that, I would consider the Crusader A-class, A tier. So not quite in the same category as Barbarians, but still quite strong based on the amount of damage they can inflict, and the speed in which that they can do it. And when push comes to shove, the better Crusaders can also utilize similar maneuverability as a Barbarian to be able to heal and re-engage, but that relies much more on the effectiveness of their teammates rather than their own skills, so their horses on cooldown, that sort of thing. And again, when facing them, probably your best bet or counter is status effects, stuns or knockbacks, things that can dismount them. Once they've been dismounted, they become quite vulnerable, whereas a Barbarian doesn't have that same vulnerability, particularly if they're using Whirlwind, which is a charge skill, and knocking them out of it doesn't have that ability on cooldown. It's just recharging and can be used continuously, providing there's enough charge. So that's like the strongest two classes currently in the game. And again, it's quite early. We're not at end game. We've not had any players fully geared or highest Paragon levels. So I certainly think it's premature to nerf any of these. I think even just an overall power decrease, adding to the survivability of every class, would see these classes balance out in a tier list, so to speak, because once tactics are more applicable in PvP or have more relevance, then players will just generally improve how they play. It's with the strong classes and others, and I think that would balance things relatively well. Following that, I would group the other 3 character classes in B tier, and they are less common as well, so it's very difficult to distinguish or differentiate between them. There haven't been a great amount of monks, for example. I've found that my support style and monkey magic build quite effective because it just helps me to survive and learn a fair bit about the game. Whereas, a more offensive style, I haven't seen anyone been too effective with. Although I have experimented with a few abilities and builds that, if I had the chance, would certainly like to explore and see the viability of. And also, given the effectiveness of offense in PvE content, this build would certainly benefit from more of a defensive focus, where I could potentially get no kills in a match, but I've disrupted the opponents enough that in a good party mix, it's my opponents dealing the damage, and I'm simply removing a lot of threats and peeling enemies from the side, penetrating through to the rear to even distract or potentially take down ranged support or ranged offense, really. Because ranged classes are the biggest threats to the strongest tier characters of Barbarians and Crusaders. So, with that being said, if I had to rank them in order of effectiveness or threat in BG, which class am I going to target more as a monk, being able to move through or past the stronger melee fighters? I'd certainly be looking to target down mage as a priority. We probably have better mages tactically on the server than bounty hunters, for example, but bounty hunters could potentially be a bigger threat than mages. But currently, if I see a mage, if I run through past Barbarians and Crusaders, and I see a mage and a bounty hunter, I'm probably going to try and take down the mage first, because their ability to nullify the biggest threats in my party are more important than the bounty hunter, and just by breaking through enemy lines usually distracts bounty hunters enough that they retreat and start to attack you instead of your main front line of defense. Whereas a mage can drop down a black hole, prevent your front line from rolling through to support, so the faster you can take them down. Also, taking down a mage, for example, who's put down a control effect or AoE, will expire the effect of that ability. So whereas a bounty hunter can be, as long as they're using their basic attack, can be a bit of a threat. Following that, I would probably put bounty hunter next, purely because we don't have a lot of monks that are providing offensive tactical advantages. The most effective are sort of support, focused around either distracting or nullifying the damage dealers on the opponent's side. They can do significant damage with good builds, potentially, as much as Crusader and Barbarians, but at range, but of course are quite vulnerable to more agile classes like Barbarians. Well, Barbarians can be extremely quick. Crusaders with their horse, at least temporarily, can be just as quick, and monks can be quite agile and maneuverable and equally as quick if abilities are set up right. So it's quite close in that B tier. If your party has mages, or to give examples of my experience, there are mages. My objectives are to bait out their control abilities on myself that I can potentially avoid and even survive, rather than have them used on large groups, which can potentially wipe out the entire team in one go rather than just myself. They'll quite usually panic if I'm able to break through the break back lines, and of course they're much better off whacking down their black hole on me before I kill them than trying to save it on the chance that they survive. When I face demon hunters, I don't necessarily want to remove them from the battlefield. So long as I can get them retreating far enough, I'll disengage and just survive in order for them to not be able to counter the other melee fighters on my team. Other monks, there's not a great deal of monks that I've faced in Battlegrounds that I feel are a threat, so typically I just try and ignore them and do what helps my team the most. What I do notice is one of my strategies being quite maneuverable with these abilities as I'm demonstrating. I can get out of danger quite quickly. So in order to protect my party, I might just simply make a break for it, draw some of their faster classes that can pursue me, and I may even just take them as far away from my group or the objectives we're trying to achieve in Battlegrounds as possible, and just wait for them and try and take them on one-on-one. And in a few situations, even stronger, better geared characters I'm able to disable and take down one-on-one. If a whole group follows me, even better. I'll just try and delay them while my abilities cool down, and then simply run them around somewhere else while my team completes objectives. So I think I'll leave it with that. There's obviously a great more depth. I believe there certainly are multiple viable builds for each character class that we have yet to see, particularly when it comes to tankiness, given that trying to focus in the early and mid game of this game on defensives is going to give you a disadvantage in progression. You know, you'll get around maps slower because it takes you longer to kill things. It's probably just less enjoyable in general in PvE content, even though I'm quite enjoying being able to goose egg battleground matches if played particularly well. Goose egg being like not being killed once in a match, which of course with the videos I've been putting makes for a much more interesting match. Unless there's a decent conversation about strategy while I'm respawning, it can get quite a bit boring. So thanks for watching, and have a good one.